Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Friday, April 20th, 2018, and, oh gosh, that's right. It's April 20th, so that means it's 4:20, and, I just don't have time to get distracted with the idea that, the top priority really needs to be marijuana legalization right now. Okay, fine, granted. Now can I move on and get to the other things? I have no dog in that hunt. If I did, he would probably be high, and, what would be the point of having him hunt at that point? Anyway, all right, without getting into all of that, plenty to discuss today. The internet once again aflame as the president awakens and rage tweets from bed. I think he may still be in Mar-a-Lago, so he's really loafing it this time. What's in the news this morning? Well, let's see. The Comey memos were leaked, I think, yesterday. And, we didn't even really get to the discussion of the battle being waged by Republicans in Congress to force the release of the Comey memos through subpoenas before they were leaked anyway, or at least mostly leaked. I'm not exactly certain whether all the memos are out or some of the memos are out. They're pretty highly redacted, but then there were some mistakes in the redacting, and so we're learning a lot more than we were meant to learn. And in the meantime, more stupid news, almost as weird and dumb as Michael Cohen's third secret client turning out to be Sean Hannity. The news comes out today that Trump has hired Rudy Giuliani to his legal team for the defense of on the Russia probe, and nothing could be dumber or more hilarious, but there it is. We've got a couple of news articles about that, and before I even get to that, I guess I should scroll back here to the tweet storm of David Carroll, Associate Professor of Media Design at the Parsons Design School, the New School, etc. And apparently he says researching intersections between advertising, journalism, politics, data, algorithms, etc. Sounds really interesting. Ordinarily, you might not first go to a associate professor of media design for such observations, but then you realize, wow, America and the world, in fact, is full of smart people who actually know lots or have insightful things to say about things about which they do not have a professional expertise necessarily, although here we have some intersection here. He commenting on the Giuliani hiring at first, shouldn't Giuliani be a witness? He boasted of the October surprise. And going on then to tweet, hey guys, WTH. He's a very clean worker there. What the heck? We'll say. It's not even what the hell. It's what the heck. Including this tweet here with a video clip of, Giuliani on Fox and Friends. Here's Rudy Giuliani in November 2016 admitting that the FBI had leaked information to the Trump campaign, giving them advanced warning about Comey's letter. And that brings us to the New York FBI office, about which Armando has so frequently commented. And by the way, I would imagine that you have some comments to add today, and if you're free to do so, I invite you to do so. It's going to be a hell of a day as it is. Let's see, his next tweet in the tweet storm, and that's not even yet the one that caught my eye. It's not like Giuliani's firm is smack dab in the middle of the Trump and Brexit data scandals. Oh, wait, it totally is. And by the way, I should add the one little thing I didn't read from David Carroll's Twitter bio, literally the last two letters. I told you he was an associate professor of media design. It says here, at Parsons Design, at the New School, teaching, I don't know what this is, MFADT, I'm not certain what that is. It's a Twitter handle as well. Anyway, researching intersections between advertising, journalism, politics, data, algos, which I took to be algorithms. Then the final two letters, UX. And I was wondering at the time whether that is UX. Is that something I don't know? Is that US and UK? Like the way we now say Latinx to cover both Latinos and Latinas? I was curious. That's a very clever abbreviation, if that's the case. And so I guess that would explain his interest in both Trump and Brexit. And really, honestly, you can't take a comprehensive look at either one of them without the intersection with the other. So I'm in agreement there. But yes, he reminds us it's not like Giuliani's firm is smack dab in the middle of the Trump and Brexit data scandals. Oh, wait, it totally is. Sending us a rather lengthy screen grab that, well, for the moment, we will take we will grant that it illustrates that point exactly. That way we can get on to the next tweet, which is actually the one that grabbed my attention. Giuliani's firm was advising Mercer, Bannon, Nix on election law violations. Then Nix sought illicit emails from Assange before Giuliani touted them. Parliament evidence shows Cambridge Analytica links with Assange run deeper than previously thought. How do you like that? Now, that's the end of the current tweet storm, but I'll keep that one open and maybe we'll pop back in there and check in on it. Yes, it's true. Trump has hired Giuliani and two other attorneys, it says here in the Washington Post piece, amid mounting legal turmoil over Russia. So we'll definitely keep that in mind. This article, too, is what the Hill was pointing to when they were tweeting the other strange legal-ish news of the day, which was that Trump has been grousing semi-privately. He never grouses privately entirely. He always thinks it's best if it makes it into the newspapers. Grousing that Neil Gorsuch has, of course, become too liberal now that he's been appointed to the Supreme Court. What happened, of course, was Trump lost a case before the Supreme Court, and Gorsuch voted with the majority that voted against whatever. I don't even recall exactly what it was. It was an immigration position, I'm sure. And but striking down something that Trump, I guess intended to pull off by executive order and had fouled up again. And naturally, the easiest complaint in the world from somebody who takes all his cues from politicians in a box on a television box telling him what to think. Of course, he goes immediately to that. Yes, he's a huge liberal, is Neil Gorsuch. That's exactly what's happening. All right. Plenty to round up today, and it ought to be a hell of a day to do it. Bill knows it, and he started us off with a morning tweet that delivers or promises too much. I think Daily Kos Radio is live now. That part is true. Kagro X, that part is me, reads the Comey memos the only way they should be, while sucking on helium, and that might not even be such a bad idea. We'll have to consider giving that a shot. It's just that I don't have that much helium available to me. No, okay, so I like my interpretation of what UX means better, but I had my suspicion that it in fact meant something technical instead. Michael Musson said it's UX, user interface design, is what that means. Why X means interface design, I have no idea, but you people talk code to each other, and as long as you guys understand it, that's all that really matters. I think it's more clever. I like the idea of saying UX then you would have capitalized it, but I like the idea of UX for both US and UK. I think that's super clever, and you should all start doing that now. Give us UX back. Yes, okay. Literally, it says user experience. That's why X, because the word experience starts with X. It sounds like it does. It's E, and UE doesn't really help anybody, but neither does UX. Okay. But I believe that, and that is probably what he meant. I'm just saying he should change his mind and do the other thing instead. All right, there's like a million things going on here. Which direction shall we start with? Why not take a dive into this Washington Post piece to cover the hiring of Giuliani and the grousing about Gorsuch, and see if we can't get that straightened out. Lots of fluff up at the top, bottom line of which is Giuliani has been hired. So have two other former federal prosecutors. We'll see if we can find out who they are. You're going to tell us? Let's see. 1 paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs, 4 paragraphs, 5, 6, 7. Who are these other people? Where is this stuff? All right, well, we'll have to just wait and see, I guess. The fantastic Robert Costa reporting this one. Josh Dawsey as well. Rosalind Helderman also on the byline. Nobody noticed that the two other federal prosecutors aren't named anywhere, apparently, in this article. The reshuffling comes at a particularly tense juncture for Trump, who aides say is increasingly frustrated by special counsel Mueller's investigation and with senior officials at the Justice Department. The entry of Giuliani, an experienced attorney with a combative reputation, because he was lacking for that in his team, immediately raises questions about how Trump will engage with Mueller and the leadership of justice. Some Trump advisors are concerned that the president could use his executive authority to close or diminish the special counsel probe, which has spawned a parallel investigation in New York targeting his personal attorney. I'm doing it because I hope we can negotiate an end for this for the good of the country and because I have a high regard for the president and for Bob Mueller, Giuliani said in an interview Thursday. Trump said in a statement that Giuliani, quote, wants to get this matter quickly resolved. Well, tough crap. In recent days, the president has been regularly venting and speculating to aides about his legal status and the expected timeline for the Russia investigation to end, according to associates briefed on the discussions. Trump also loudly and repeatedly complained to several advisors this week that former FBI Director James Comey, former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, and former Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton, among others, should be charged with crimes for misdeeds alleged by Republicans, the associates said. Although White House officials said Thursday that Trump had not called Justice Department officials or taken any formal action, the persistent grousing has made some advisors anxious, according to two people close to the president. A publicity tour by Comey to promote his book, critical of Trump, A Higher Loyalty, the name of the book, has attracted particular attention from the president, who has disparaged Comey publicly and privately. Trump also complained, here we are, this week about Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, saying the judge had proved too liberal in recent cases. According to administration officials who heard about the complaints, associates said he was incensed that Gorsuch had voted against the administration on an immigration case and said it renewed his doubts that Gorsuch would be a reliable conservative. One top Trump advisor played down the comments as unhappiness with Gorsuch's decision rather than with Gorsuch broadly. Whatever. Giuliani. Okay, here we are onto the Giuliani. Pardon me. Wow. Okay. All the buttons not working here. So that is, I blocked out the good part and turned it back on for the cough. That's good news. Giuliani, 73. Brings a familiarity with several of the legal fronts that Trump is navigating. Way into corruption. We know that. He's a former Associate Attorney General and former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, which is the office overseeing the investigation of Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen. Trump counsel Jay Sekulow said Thursday that former federal prosecutors, here we are, finally, Jane Serene Raskin and Marty Raskin, a couple who manage a Florida-based law firm, have also agreed to join the legal team. I'm curious about that. That's a weird combo of people to pick. But by the way, let me just finish my count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, one of those paragraphs is one sentence, but technically it's a paragraph. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It is the 11th paragraph. We find out that the Raskins are the people we're talking about here. Giuliani is certain to come under intense scrutiny for his role. His own pre-election activities 2 years ago have been the subject of criticism from Democrats, especially television interviews in which he suggested he had sources providing him inside information about the FBI's investigation of Clinton's private email server when she was Secretary of State. A Justice Department Inspector General report on the department's handling of the Clinton investigations is expected to be released in coming weeks and will probably include results of leak investigations regarding the Clinton probe. Numerous other challenges face the attorneys who will work alongside Sekulow and counsel Ty Cobb, who have functioned as Trump's legal nucleus for weeks following the resignation of John Dowd, a legal veteran and the team's former leader. Dowd stepped down in March amid clashes over strategy and whether Trump should sit for a voluntary interview with Mueller. The legal team has often been beset by infighting. The big question is, how is he going to play with everybody else? Said a lawyer involved with the investigation who was not authorized to speak publicly. Will he be combative, Rudy, or will he play well with Mueller's team? Will he try to walk back from the brink and answer the big question, which is whether the president will sit for an interview? And will Trump listen to him? Giuliani declined to say whether Trump has made a final decision on whether to sit for an interview. Trump has been mulling it for weeks, as he often does with almost anything, except what to eat. Moving away from the idea after the home, offices, and hotel room of Cohen was raided this month, Trump reacted angrily, calling it disgraceful. Blah, blah, blah. Some more stuff. Let's see. What else can we find out of interest about Giuliani? Giuliani said he formalized his decision in recent days, including over dinner, obviously. Everything's done over a meal with Donald Trump. Last week at Mar-a-Lago, Giuliani and Trump spoke Thursday about the legal plan moving forward, along with Sekulow, who he has known for years and called a friend, despite the fact that they're both vampires. He added that he and Cobb also spoke on Wednesday. Giuliani, who will take leave from his law firm Greenberg Traurig, also worth noting, and is in the midst of a divorce from his third wife, had said he would, quote, spend a, quote, great deal of time in Washington working with Trump, but would continue to live in New York. He has been, which, of course, all the travel for which will be reimbursed by funds taken from his re-election campaign. So you out there, Mr. Mom and Pop Operation MAGA hat, are paying for this, but I'm sure you're proud to do so. He's been frequently seen holding court at the Trump International Hotel in Washington, dining and drinking with friends, and browsing for gourmet cigars, of which there really are none. Trump had considered Giuliani for Attorney General, and has said in recent weeks he needs a New York-based attorney. Many leading white-collar lawyers, such as former Solicitor General Theodore Olson, have declined Trump's entreat. He's often citing conflicts or expressing unease about the high-profile case. You're an effing liar and an unlawyerable moron. I can't help you. Trump is also known to be a difficult client. There we are. That's how the newspapers say it. Who does not always listen to his attorney's advice, according to lawyers who know him. And Giuliani, once a top advisor, grew frustrated with this treatment during the transition and has receded from the inner circle. So much receding about Giuliani, isn't there? As he has closely monitored cable news programs chronicling his presidency and the Mueller probe, Trump has swatted away the notion that he cannot attract prominent attorneys. Swat. He has also spoken about his desire for a bolstered team and wondered aloud about the damage that Cohen's legal proceedings could bring, according to associates briefed on the discussions, who requested anonymity to talk about them. So basically, people who hear him yelling at the television are telling us pretty much exactly what we thought. Okay, I was going to skip the rest, but I see the mention of a name. He's in Mar-a-Lago, so Christopher Ruddy is in the news. And you really, I think it's always worth keeping an eye on what Christopher Ruddy is doing. He's a scumbag himself, but he is quite open and usually blabs something that we can use later to hang Trump with. Let's see. What we've been seeing with the president is that he is picking A-level people that he knows are experienced but also know him well. That's puffery. That was Chris Ruddy, president and CEO of Newsmax Media, a conservative outlet. One of the problems in the first year was that people didn't work out because they didn't know him and they didn't have experience for the position. Well, that's another way of saying, I guess the kindest way of saying, one of the problems in the first year was that people didn't work out because he didn't know them. That is, he had seen them on TV and thought that they might make a good whatever. But they were just morons from TV, and Trump can't tell the difference between fictional characters or what people look like on television and how they really function. And real life isn't television, and that doesn't really occur to him. And so that's a good part of why the Trump administration has sucked horribly. I mean, I guess we can just put it that way. The other thing, so much discussed this morning, and I should reiterate that. I have so much discussed this morning, and there's been so much discussed this morning about Trump. But back to an old topic, which I'm going to enjoy covering, but I am also going to express a little bit of frustration at not having had it catch on already. What the effing F, everybody. I told you this was true a million years ago. I didn't do the digging. It was in the media. So if you don't trust me, that's fine. No one was hearing our show. I understand that. It's just us here. Then nobody else is cool and smart enough to listen to the show. Just you and me. But I'm glad they're catching on. I wish it had happened earlier. I don't know what to tell you. It's just the way the system works. It takes a long time to convince everybody of this crap. But here we are. The Washington Post prints a story today, and I saw an excellent observation made by, someone, and then I will scroll back. I try to keep my Twitter feed open so that I can scroll back and credit everybody properly, but then I click on the things to tell you. If I click on one, I'm lost, and I got to go back. Who said this? There we are, Duke Street Journal, if you are a follower like I am on Twitter. Duke Street Journal observing, given this Jonathan Greenberg story that I'm about to read you. Given that John Greenberg's piece, by the way, Jonathan Greenberg tweeting as journalist JG, in case you want to follow along. Given that Jonathan Greenberg's onion peeling of Trump's finances, that's what's coming, or lack thereof, was published in the Washington Post, how long until we get another round of Amazon tweets? Excellent thought, and you should start the clock. Now I will give you the beginnings of the story that will no doubt spark a series of attacks on Amazon before the day is out. Trump lied to me. What? Amazing. Trump lied to me about his wealth to get onto the Forbes 400. And here are the tapes. We may even actually play those tapes. Posing as John Barron, remember that guy? He claimed he owned most of his father's real estate empire. Jonathan Greenberg writing this one, and this takes us back to, we've heard this story before, but this is just interesting and juicy new detail that everyone's talking about. Many people are talking about this, so we're going to talk about it too. In May 1984, that's how far back this goes, an official from the Trump Organization called to tell me how rich Donald J. Trump was. I was reporting for the Forbes 400, the magazine's annual ranking of America's richest people, for the third year. In the previous edition, we'd valued Trump's holdings at $200 million. And that, by the way, he points out, only 1/5 of what he claimed to own in our interviews. This time, his aide urged me on the phone. I needed to understand just how loaded Trump really was. And so just for a second here, they valued Trump's holdings at $200 million, 1/5 of what he claimed. So in 1984, he claimed to be a billionaire. They were only able to, I guess, live with reporting $200 million, but it gets worse from there. The official on the phone, of course, was John Barron, a name we now know as an alter ego of Trump himself. When I recently rediscovered and listened for the first time since that year to the tapes I made of this and other phone calls, I was amazed that I didn't see through the ruse. Although Trump altered some cadences and affected a slightly stronger New York accent, it was clearly him. Quote, Barron told me that Trump had taken possession of the business he ran with his father, Fred. And here's the quote, most of the assets have been consolidated to Mr. Trump. You have down Fred Trump as half owner, but I think you can really use Donald Trump now. Trump, through his sock puppet, was telling me he owned in excess of 90% of his family's business. With all the home runs Trump was hitting in real estate, Barron told me, he should be called a billionaire. So they have the tapes here. Again, part of the frustration is, it says right here, John Barron, a name we now know as an alter ego of Trump himself, links to another Washington Post article, of course, from March of 2016. Like, were you looking? Because I don't know. I would lose tapes like that too. I'd be amazed if I could dig up something from 1984, I guess. I just, you wish things were more organized. In March of 2016, they're like, Donald Trump used to regularly call newspaper sources and pretend he was a totally different guy and brag about Trump in order to get good stuff, usually sex stuff, into the gossip columns. But he also called Forbes 400 list writers to say, I should be a billionaire. Or, I mean, he should. He should totally be a billionaire, and he should be listed that way. And nobody bothered to find the effing tapes until now. I don't know. I don't know that I would have come up with it. I find it interesting. All right. Let's read up until the break, and then maybe we'll come back and press the play button on this thing and see if we can't get to hear Donald Trump pretending to be John Barron. Did the other reporter find the tapes? I can't recall. I think she did, and it was pretty obvious. But we'll refresh our memories with this tape. Anyway, at the time, the reporter says, I suspected that some of this was untrue, that he should be called a billionaire. But it is interesting that he's making this argument. It's really kind of fascinating. I really own a bunch of stuff that I don't own. All right. Well, anyway, he says, I ran Trump's assertions to the ground. And for many years, I was proud of the fact that Forbes had called him on his distortions and based his net worth on what I thought was solid research. But it took decades to unwind the elaborate farce Trump had built to project an image as one of the richest people in America. Nearly every assertion supporting that claim was untrue. Trump wasn't just poorer than he said he was. Over time, I have learned that he should not have been on the first 3 Forbes 400 lists at all. In our first ever list in 1982, we included him at $100 million. But Trump was actually worth roughly $5 million. It's a lot of money to you and me, but not to them. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Okay, well, I got so into the music there and a couple of other news pieces that I let the music play out before I actually remembered to come back from break. I'm a little tired. I'm a little exhausted with this whole thing, but when we left off, we were getting ready to take a quick look at the tapes that Jonathan Greenberg finally dug up about the fake John Barron call. But when we left off, we were just reminding ourselves, I guess, of what we already knew, but which Jonathan, I guess, is well, I'm glad he's doing it because it takes a lot of repetition to let this sink in with most of America. And of course, there'll be people who are resistant to letting it sink in no matter what. But once again, not only, as they said, was Trump poorer than what he said, and I thought that was kind of a strange construction there. I mean, poorer. I mean, he's not poor, obviously, but he's not as wealthy as he says he was. So, but just to take it all in again, it took decades to unwind the elaborate farce Trump had built to project an image as one of the richest people in America. That's an extremely important thing to say. It really doesn't take that long to unwind it, but in order to prove that you've unwound it, I guess, to doubters and skeptics, and it's always wise to build your case to appeal to doubters and skeptics. That might take decades. You and I, who are at liberty to make assumptions about such things, reach that conclusion pretty quickly. But there you have it. Again, the elaborate farce Trump has built to project an image as one of the richest people in America. And here on the show, and I'm trying to reiterate that point out there on Twitter, we have another important piece of the puzzle, which is the testimony, essentially, of the editors of The Apprentice, whose job it was to create an elaborate farce that would project an image of him as one of the best business people in America. That was false, and his wealth was false, and those two things were the premise upon which he built, well, everything he has and ran for the presidency, and that's kind of problematic. Anyway, like he says here in this piece, nearly every assertion supporting the claim of his wealth was untrue. Trump wasn't just not as wealthy, we'll say, as he said he was. Over time, I learned that he shouldn't have been on the first 3 Forbes 400 lists at all. And imagine the power, like over banks and lenders and creditors, etc., that you can create if you can worm your way falsely onto the Forbes 400 list, right? Lend me some money. Why should I? How do I know you'll pay it back? I'm on the Forbes 400 list. Yes. Okay, fine. I'll build you that custom limo. I'll lend you the money to buy an airline, whatever else you're looking for. Because what risk is there in loaning money to somebody on the Forbes 400 list? You're one of the richest people in America. Of course you'll be able to pay me back. What if I'm lying? What if I told you I was worth $1 billion, but I was really worth $5 million? I mean, again, in the ordinary course of things, if I had a friend who I thought was verifiably worth $5 million and he asked me for $20, I'd lend it to him on the premise that a millionaire 5 times over would be able to pay me my $20 back. But of course, it doesn't scale, is what we're saying, to use some modern industry buzzwords. Anyway, he goes on to say in the first ever list in 1982, they included him at $100 million, but Trump was really worth about $5 million, a paltry sum by the standards of his super-moneyed peers, as a spate of government reports and books showed only much later. Okay, and so now, at this point, they have embedded the phone conversation between Jonathan Greenberg and, quote, John Barron, who is Donald Trump. There's 1 minute and 55 seconds of tape here, and we'll listen to a little bit of it at a time, I guess. I tried playing this on my phone this morning, and it kept bouncing me straight back out of it. I'm hoping that the regular desktop computers will play it. I think I'll move over from the laptop right onto the broadcast machine here to see if we can't capture all of this audio better. Let's try and run this thing.
In the future, a nation's technology will determine its power.
All right, well, perhaps not quite as interesting here. Let me. Do we listen to the ad, or can I mute the ad? Let's see. There. I think we can mute it. It's for Hewlett Packard, who isn't paying me or anybody else anything for this. So I don't know. We'll mention their name because they worked so hard to create their ad. All right, let's go.
Okay, what's your first name down there? John.
Well, let me tell you what the deal is, just so you understand.
Okay.
Mr. Trump bought, first of all, most of the assets have been consolidated to Mr. Trump, because you have down Fred Trump, and I'd like to talk to you off the record if I can, just to make your thing easier.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's talk off the record right here on the tape. I mean, okay, that's fine. But anyway, it's just funny. And he's right. It is quite obviously Donald Trump. But okay, terrible audio quality, by the way. But it was 1984. What can you do?
Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, but I think you can really use Donald Trump now, and you can just consolidate. I think last year somebody showed me the article, and I think you had 200 and 200. And really, it's been pretty well consolidated now for the most part. As I also think somebody had mentioned that you had asked about that, or somebody had, and it's been pretty well consolidated. Okay?
Uh-huh.
So that's one point that you can.
Now, is that including the residential?
Yes.
It's like ear splitting to listen to. All right, they've made their point, and besides which, we're only going to end up with a copyright issue if we use too much more of this, I guess. But It's clearly a more articulate and on his game Donald Trump, and he's deteriorated considerably since then. But the style of lie is pretty obvious and recognizable, and as well as the pattern of speech. So, okay. Anyway, on with the story. The White House declined to comment for this story. The Trump Organization didn't respond either. I was a determined 25-year-old reporter, Greenberg writes, and I thought that by reeling Trump back from some of his more outrageous claims, I'd done a public service and exposed the truth. But his confident deceptions were so big that they had an unexpected effect. Instead of believing that they were outright fabrications, my Forbes colleagues and I saw them simply as vain embellishments on the truth. We were so wrong. That's a really interesting and important point to make, too. Daniel Dale, I noticed, picked up on the same thing. I mean, this is much more than, well, you know, I can exaggerate $100 million into $150 million, which, you know, hey, give or take $50 million. I mean, come on. But that's at least almost in the understandable range. This guy was saying, I'm a billionaire, and and they can verify no more than $5 million. That's a huge inflation. And as he goes on to say here, this was a model Trump would use for the rest of his career. Not just inflating stuff, but as he puts it, telling a lie so cosmic that people believed that some kernel of it had to be real. I mean, that's my regular assumption, right? Even about fake news stuff. A lie so cosmic that people believed that some kernel of it had to be real. The tactic landed him a place on the Forbes list he hadn't earned, and that, of course, led to future accolades, press coverage, and deals. It eventually paved a path toward the presidency. Think about it. I mean, I don't know if he actually takes the time to outline it step by step here. I hope so, because I would really love to see it. And there's more to the article, so fingers crossed that they lay this out. But see, what's happening here is, even if you were to believe that he was a fabulous deal maker and a billionaire many times over and whatever, it all starts by lying his way onto the Forbes 400 list and then leveraging having been on the Forbes 400 list into everything else. You should lend me money. I'm one of the wealthiest people in America. You're not. But I am. Look, I'm on the Forbes 400 list. They don't lie. They would know. They investigate these things, right? You lied as well. You should go into business with me. Why? You're a loser. No, I'm on the Forbes 400 list. You should partner with me on this deal. Why? You're a loser. No, I'm not. I'm on the Forbes 400 list. You should take your clothes off and model for me. You should sleep with me. Why? You're a loser. No, I am worth $1 billion. It says so right here in this magazine. Spank me with it. You can even do that. But you see everything he's done. I mean, literally everything he's done. Why are his children his children? Why is his wife his wife? Why does he live where he lives? Why was he able to build Trump Tower? Why was he able to, even after all of his failures, create The Apprentice? Why any of this stuff? Because it was all a calculated show. I'll lie my way onto the Forbes 400 list, paint my toilet gold, and go to Studio 54, and anybody I see who's attractive, I'll tell them I'm a billionaire. You should sleep with me. You're going to get money. But I heard you were only worth $5 million, which is plenty. But no, he's turned it into $1 billion, and now it's actually worth considering for some people, I guess. Right? You know, it's always that party game. Well, how much would it take to get you to do this, that, or the other thing? Would you do it for $5 million? Never. Not in $1 million. Would you do it for $1 billion? I hope not, but maybe. Now, back to the article here. Malcolm Forbes came up with the idea of the Forbes 400 in 1981 and assigned me to spend a year traveling around the country and interviewing wealthy people and those who worked with them about one another. The most challenging sector was private real estate wealth. And for good reason, by the way. I guess I can pause right here. He'll explain it too. But remember that the reason, or I guess you would now be able to assume at this point, the reason I'm sure that the most challenging sector was private real estate wealth is the same reason that private real estate is such a great forum for money laundering. You can just value anything you've got at any number you want. So, I doubt very much that very many people on the Forbes 400 list have assets entirely made out of Oriental rugs, but I suppose it's entirely possible. But other money laundering schemes, almost certainly a part of the inflation of wealth for a lot of people. But yeah, private real estate is probably pretty opaque. My grandfather, the article continues, had been an accountant to a number of major New York developers, so I had the advantage of knowing many of the players there. But the reporting was opaque because so few of the relevant financial documents were public. We relied disproportionately on what people told us. As the project progressed, other experienced reporters and editors joined what would become the most successful annual special issue in Forbes history. From the beginning, Trump was obsessed. The project could offer a clear, supposedly authoritative declaration of his status as a player. And while many of the super rich wanted to keep their names off the ranking, Trump was desperate to scale it. When I first contacted him for the inaugural issue, Trump pulled out all the stops to convince me that he not only belonged on the list, I'll add, but was the wealthiest real estate developer in New York. At an afternoon-long meeting in his cavernous Fifth Avenue office, he argued that his family was worth more than $900 million and deserved to be higher on our list than any of the far more accomplished developers, with names like Rose and Rudin, which will probably make sense only to New Yorkers there, who had spent generations building top-tier housing in the Golden Borough of Manhattan. His father, Fred Trump, was well known for building nearly all the apartments that the Trump Organization owned before Donald even joined the company. So it amazed me when Donald claimed that he, and not his father, possessed 80% of the 23,000 apartments he said they had in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. He added that these were almost debt-free and worth $40,000 each. I questioned his valuation. Trump shrugged and said, okay, then $20,000 each. Why not? I'll half the value. That would mean his family was worth some $500 million, still atop our list for New York real estate tycoons. But that figure seemed high. I estimated the apartments to be worth about $9,000 each. They couldn't be easily converted into lucrative co-ops. The Trump family had falsely described the location of the Queens buildings. He'd claimed that they were in Forest Hills when in fact they were on the far less valuable Jamaica Estates neighborhood a few miles away. Since Donald's new projects were still in development or unproven, the outer borough apartments formed the basis of a Trump family net worth estimate of $200 million. Okay, so that's where he finally settles. 6 weeks after my initial interview, I received a call at my desk from Trump's secretary and gatekeeper, Norma Forderer. She said she wanted my work address so Trump could send me an invitation to a company party. Then she abruptly added, "Oh, Donald was just passing by. He said that he wanted to have a few words with you." Okay, now there's another phone conversation here from July 15th, 1982. So this one actually previous to the other one. And Donald Trump claiming to actually be Donald Trump in this one. I switched on my audio recorder, my normal practice, as Trump expressed his concern for what he called your little article. He invited me for a follow-up interview with him because he said he was richer than the rest. I don't think that you have your facts 100% correct about his standing vis-a-vis other New York developers. I was contemplating a too low appraisal of his net worth, he said. You had us down in a certain category, and then you mentioned other names. And there's no contest, you know? There's no contest. So I just wanted to mention that. We can actually listen to Trump himself mumbling that nonsense, although I don't know whether I imagine this recording is likewise ear-splitting, but let's just get a taste of it. I'll bet there'll be an advertisement in it, too. Let's see if we can be ready on the mute button with that.
In the future...
There it is. And it's the same one for the same company, who should now pay me twice. This ad will end in 13 seconds. But not if I don't mute it and then restart it. Okay. Anyway, good for you, company, spending so much money on this. I don't know why that's valuable to you, but I need something to say for the next 2 seconds. Here we go.
Well, it was a tremendous deal from any standpoint, I guess. But what I think you might want to do is, at some point, maybe after that, before you write your little article, maybe you want to call me again and sit down, because I'd like to discuss a couple of things. Mm-hmm. You know, I look at Harris from my, I look at the Forbes from my standpoint
Forbes.
as being important.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think that in the numerous cases, but you know, I can only judge by the New York realtors that you mentioned. I don't think that you have your facts 100% correct.
Well, anyway, he doesn't. He's already overinflated your worth by something like, 40 times the first time around. But, you know, once again, the same MO, certainly the same voice. What's funny about this is it now strikes me, this is a conversation from 1982, and it's, I think, less than 2 years hence. This is, let's say, July 15th, 1982. The one we were listened to earlier with at a much greater volume was less than 2 years, a little less. May 17th, 1984. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess at that point he's really not that well known as a famous developer. I mean, he begins to kind of emerge on the scene, and he has emerged on the scene. And I guess for a Forbes reporter who's doing the Forbes 400, and it's based on interviewing all the people, how it is, as he says, that I didn't see through the ruse. In July 1982, he has extensive conversation. Well, this is the recording's only a minute. I guess that's not an extensive conversation, but he gets invited to talk to him in his office, and he's invited to a dinner party, and yada yada. And then 2 years later, he gets a phone call from somebody claiming to be John Barron, and it's like, I know that voice, but he didn't know that voice. But okay, I mean, it's hard to compare it now that he's so ultra famous, and the presidency has done plenty to even increase that. I guess it makes it difficult to judge whether or not 2 years later some schmuck developer and remember, he is interviewing, you know, the 400 richest people in America. There's 399 other, you know, affected a-holes with distinctive speech patterns, perhaps, out there who are all richer than he is. And probably, you know, maybe they bother him just as much as Donald Trump does. But anyway, I guess it would have been nice if he had seen through it then. All right. So anyway, he complains, and I don't know if you had your facts 100% correct, yada, yada. Trump knew I had doubts about his assertions, he writes. So he had his lawyer, Roy Cohn, remember, call me. Cohn spent most of his time threatening lawsuits, schmoozing with mobster clients, and badgering reporters with off-the-record utterances that made his clients look good and their enemies look bad. Cohn surprised me at my Forbes desk that summer. John Greenberg, a scrappy voice bellowed before I could connect my tape recorder. I took notes by hand. This is Roy Cohn. You can't quote me. But Donnie, that's funny. Donnie tells me you're putting together this list of rich people. He says you've got him down for just $200 million. That's way too low. Listen, I'm Donnie's personal lawyer, but he said I could talk to you about this. I am sitting here looking at this current bank statement. It shows he's got more than $500 million in liquid assets. Just cash. That's just Donald. Nothing to do with Fred. And it's just cash. He concluded, he's worth more than any of those other guys in this town. I offered to have a messenger pick up the bank statement at his office. Cohn protested that the document was confidential. Just trust me, he said. I told him I wouldn't take his word without seeing the paperwork. It's confidential, Cohn yelled. My Forbes editor and I spent many hours deliberating about where to place Trump. By the way, I mean, I have to pause at this point to say, do you see what he did there? I mean, why would you even put your lawyer on this at all, ever? It doesn't make any sense, and I'll sue you if you don't put me high enough on the list. Remember, most people with actual money were like, please don't put me on that list. Wow. So they deliberated many hours about where to place Trump based on what little we knew. His claims, a 1976 New York Times profile that said the Trump Organization owned 22,000 apartments, and Fred's reputation for housing a generation of working-class New Yorkers in Brooklyn and Queens. We ranked Donald and Fred in the bottom tier among major real estate developers, each with half of a $200 million apartment empire. Fair enough, really. Even though I learned later that this was far more money than Donald possessed, it did not satisfy him for the following year's edition. But just again, time out. They overestimated his worth at $100 million. Just out of what? I don't know. Frustration, and maybe he'll shut up if we put him on a damn list. And Roy Cohn is calling and saying he has $500 million just in cash alone. Oh my God. There's the cosmic liar he learned from. All right, so he's still not he's not satisfied. During his 1983 interview for the next list, Trump claimed that there were actually 25,000 apartments and that his net worth had ballooned because of the success of his new projects, Trump Tower and the Grand Hyatt Hotel on East 42nd Street, as well as a pending casino deal in Atlantic City. Then Cohn called again, this time to say Trump was worth more than $700 million. I recorded our chat. He opened with an outrageous claim that Trump had personally received $250 million from the recent sale of a 50% interest in his new project to build a Harrah's casino in Atlantic City. Now, this time, I guess we should play this video because I don't really know what Roy Cohn sounds like, and now I'd like to hear it. And I wonder if that's a voice that I can do. All right, let's see. Phone conversation between Jonathan Greenberg and Roy Cohn, June 21st, 1983. Of course, there'll be that ad again, I'm sure. And perhaps this time I can mute that without pausing it. There we are. They're very adamant that you know about all their work over there at Company X. All right. We've got 5 seconds to wait for this stupid ad to go away. And then Roy Cohn.
What he's worth. What do you think of his net worth and how solid?
$750.
What would you base that on?
I would base that on the recent sale of the 50% interest in Harrah's.
He received
$250 million.
That was clear?
Well, it cleared up. A certain amount was clear, say around $100 million. Mm-hmm. So it was all clear to him. But the balance was used by him to liquidate certain other things, which made his overall position very impregnable. Trump Tower has been going like a house of fire, and the profits on that.
Did you catch that? Trump Tower has been going like a house of fire. It is a house of fire. But, well, okay, it didn't happen for many years hence. And anyway, it's tragic because somebody died. And I shouldn't be laughing at it. But then again, I don't know. Then again, nothing. It's just an excuse for laughing at a tragedy. All right, just a few more seconds just to hear Roy Cohn's mellifluous tones once again.
Much higher than had been anticipated. Mm-hmm. And the same is true with Grand Hyatt, on top of which he's been in a series of private transactions. And he files with banks for between $7 to $750 million, as well as with Equitable, which backs him in all of his deals.
In all of his, he's the articulate guy in the operation deals. So there you go. House of Fire. And he's got private stuff. You can't see it. It's worth $1 bazillion. Whatever. Again, Cohn refused to show me a statement, but armed with misinformation about Trump's casino payout and claims about cash flow and other properties, I inflated his and his father's net worth to $200 million each. In retrospect, Fred Trump was probably worth half that amount, and Donald, once again, should not have been on the list at all. He was just the child of a wealthy person who was barely on the list based on an inflated understanding of the value of his assets. The next year, I received 2 calls from John Barron, the fictitious Trump executive, who told me that Donald had taken in excess of 90% ownership from Fred. He also suggested that Trump was on track to earn a $50 million profit every year. From his first Atlantic City casino. And so in 1984, we increased Donald's net worth estimate to $400 million and left Fred in for his last year on the Forbes 400 at $200 million. Barron had also bad-mouthed the competition, saying that developer George Klein had struck a, quote, bad deal to redevelop Times Square, a bid Trump had lost, and it was, quote, going to go down the tubes. And you know, of course, Times Square is an absolute S-hole today, where no one will spend any time for fear of instantly being murdered, right? Went down the tubes. That's Donald Trump's business genius for you. Although Trump, posing as Barron, asked Forbes to conduct the conversation off the record, I am publishing it here. I believe, this is great for all you journalism critics and such, and you should take note of this. I am publishing it here. I believe an intent to deceive, both with the made-up persona and the content of the call, released me from my good faith pledge. In a 1990 court case, Trump testified that he had used false names in phone calls to reporters. In 2016, when the Washington Post published a similar recording, Trump denied it was him. Fred Trump turned down my attempts to interview him for the Forbes 400. He allowed Donald to say whatever he wanted about the family's business. In the only major interview he gave after Donald seized the limelight, and we're talking about Fred here. Let's see. In the only major interview he gave after Donald seized the limelight, Fred told the New York Times in 1983 that, quote, Donald has a competitive spirit and I don't want to compete with him. He amazes me. He's gone way beyond me. Absolutely. All right. Well, his father was able to see it even then. And he also knew probably pretty early on, you can't get in the way of Donald's urge to self-promote and lie as often as possible about as many things as possible. I tried sending him to military school when he was a kid, and they just couldn't beat it out of him. So, look, I'm an old man, and I'm just going to try and enjoy my final days and get out of his way. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We just have that 1 minute break up here at the top of the hour. Let's continue then with the article about which so many people are talking. Everybody's talking about this incredible article that obviously describes me, Donald Trump, as worth $10 bazillion. And it's so accurate and wonderful, I'm going to make the writer of the piece Secretary of, I don't know what. We got anything left for this kid? He's fantastic. Tell him. All right. Eventually, nearly every one of Trump's pronouncements about his wealth unraveled. The number of apartments was the first problem. See how complicated this web of lies is. The number of apartments was the first problem. The commonly cited figure that his family owned 25,000 units began with the mention of 22,000 apartments in that fawning 1976 New York Times profile. And I guess once you realize that they were fluffing him even in 1976 at the rate of 22,000, you see just how egregious this game has been. And by the way, should I even bother at this point? Let's describe this, and then how can I remind myself to come back to this fact? Somebody remind me, if I lose my place, that I intend to bring this conversation back to Newt Gingrich, believe it or not. And I think, hold on a second, I got to lean away from the microphone and see if I can get a physical reminder here. I have a book somewhere buried in my archives, falling apart, dog-eared piece of garbage about one of the first, all right, I'll come back to it. One of the first, not really a biography, but the first political documentary type story about the rise of Newt Gingrich, which, what was it called? Was it The Power and the Ambition or something like that? Anyway, describing Newt Gingrich's press management tactics. So again, if I lose my place, that's where I wanted to come back to. All right. The number of apartments was the first problem, describing Donald Trump's game of rising through the ranks falsely. The commonly cited figure that his family owned 25,000 units began with the mention of 22,000 apartments in that fawning 1976 New York Times profile. In 1988, after I left Forbes, I counted the units. And that's the amazing thing. Like, finally somebody says, hey, apartments, they're concrete assets. And somewhere along the line, you almost assuredly have got to have some public record of who owns the apartments so that you can collect rent on them, so that you can pay taxes on them when necessary, or when you feel like generous and you actually want to participate in society and pay taxes on them. There has to be a record somewhere. Now, of course, in later years, much later years, in our time, David Dayen, of course, has proved to us beyond the shadow of a doubt that you can absolutely fake that number too. But back in 1976, 1988 even, it was probably a lot more difficult to do. So what happened? After he left Forbes in 1988, Jonathan Greenberg says, I just counted the number of units. And I found fewer than 8,000. I own 25,000 apartments. How many? 8,000 apartments. I was working briefly on a documentary about Trump that was never completed, to the shame and detriment of us all, Jonathan. Another Forbes reporter that year, John Anderson, not the one who ran for president, but the one who reported for Forbes apparently, found the same thing. He called the Trump Residential Management Organization, he told me then, and asked an executive named Harry Green how many apartments the company owned. About 10,000. Green told him, meaning that our 1982 family valuation of $20 million should have been just $90 million below the cutoff at that time for inclusion at all on the list. A few minutes later, Green called Anderson back and corrected himself. Now there were 25,000 again. What? I heard you say that. Yeah, I'm sure he reported to the boss, and I told him, what did he ask? How many apartments do I have? What'd you tell him? Told him, the truth, 10,000. But call him back and say there's 25,000. That actually went on. Another brazen claim was that Trump, not his father, owned the company's outer borough apartments, which his father built beginning in the 1930s. Based on what Trump said during our 1982 and 1983 interviews, I'd assumed that Donald and Fred each owned half, resisting the son's insistence that he had purchased 80% of the units or consolidated the holdings himself. Still, this comment went into the Forbes 400 records, and in 1985, after I left the project, Trump was estimated to be worth $600 million, and his father was off the list. It would be decades before I learned that Forbes had been conned. Can you believe it? In the early 1980s, or perhaps I guess we should have said Forbes had been conned. Forbes had been conned because, of course, he just lied and said, I have $1 billion, and we said, no, you don't. You have $500 million, and we put him on the list. And we don't check these things. You say you own 25,000 apartments. I just write that. I check later on. Okay, you owned 8,000, but, I guess I could have checked it then, but, That is not how this works! Oh, well, you don't have to be that angry about it, but you're right. That is not how this works. All right, so it would be decades before he figures this whole thing out. Where we left off was, Forbes had been conned. In the early 1980s, Trump had zero equity in his father's company. In the early 1980s, when we put him on the list where he was saying he was worth, really, if you really look at it, I'm worth $1 billion, he had zero equity in his father's company. According to Fred's will, portions of which appeared in a lawsuit, in which, I wonder, is that the lawsuit in which Donald Trump sued Fred Trump Jr. to take all of his money away? According to Fred's will, which appeared in a lawsuit, the father retained legal ownership of his residential empire until his death in 1999, at which point he left it to be divided between his 4 surviving children and some of his grandchildren. Can we stop 1999. By 1999, Donald Trump had been all over everything, everywhere. As I'm the richest guy in the world. I own billions and billions of dollars. For decades, he had been telling people, I own more than 90% of my father's empire. They were overestimating the value of his father's empire, of course. 25,000 units. Well, it's really 8,000. Who owns them all? I own 90% of them. You own 0 of them, and you didn't own any of them until 1999. Amazing. At which point, the already overestimated assets of Fred Trump were divided between 4 surviving children and some of his grandchildren. Wow. Armando, where are you? Can you believe this? That explains why, after Trump went bankrupt in the early 1990s, and now we're really going to get to the good stuff, I think. I don't know whether he states this stuff explicitly, but think about what's going on. 1999, he's worth practically nothing based on his father's money. He doesn't own any of that. But his dad's letting him play with it and bank on it. And I mean, think about how, I guess when you were wondering about, well, why would his dad send $3 million in cash to bail him out on the casino thing? That was really Fred's own investment. That was Fred's money that he was playing with. All right. Phew. So, all right, where were we? 1999. That explains why, after Trump went bankrupt in the early 1990s, well before he actually got any piece of his father's residential empire, when Trump went bankrupt in the early 1990s, he borrowed $30 million from his siblings, secured by an estimated $35 million share on his future inheritance, according to 3 sources in Tim O'Brien's 2005 biography, Trump Nation. He could have used his own assets as collateral if he'd had any worth that amount, but he didn't. The most revelatory document describing Trump's true net worth in the early 1980s was a 1981 report from the New Jersey Casino Control Commission. And we've said that in the past in the show. That was really the only time he ever had to disclose everything publicly in any way because he needed a casino license. O'Brien, the biographer, obtained a copy for his book. Trump had applied for an Atlantic City casino license, and regulators were able to review his tax returns and personal and corporate debt, giving them the most accurate picture of his finances. By the way, just for a moment, why would the New Jersey Casino Control Commission have any particular right to do this, or on what basis were they checking into his tax records, his personal and corporate debt? And the answer is, well, we know kind of what goes on in the casino business, and we know that from time to time, that is to say always, organized crime gets its hands into the casino business. Why do they get their hands into the casino business? Because it's largely a cash business, and a largely cash business is a ripe target for money laundering, an easy place to pull off a lot of money laundering, and that's what we need to do. Organized crime, primarily, in addition to obtaining money, needs to be able to launder money in order to be able to use it for anything, really. And so, I guess like anthropologists and sociologists, well, this would really be an anthropology problem. Anthropologists will tell you, I guess, ancient settlements back in prehistorical days, even before pre-societal days. Where do people settle? They need to settle near sources of water, for instance. Well, organized crime needs to settle near sources of potential money laundering. In other words, cash businesses that make it possible to do this. Real estate, it was later realized, was also an excellent way, and a good what we might call a halfway house between straight up just cash business money laundering, like cigarette machines back in the day, or really everything back in the day was largely a cash business. Taxi cabs, for instance, before the days of Uber and or being able to pay for your taxi on the go with a credit card, not always the case. Lots of cash businesses, but in particular real estate, because valuation was so flexible. It really helped the money laundering business take off. And the marriage between organized crime and New York, New Jersey area real estate was solidified. Anyway, the Casino Commission knew that that was the case, and so they said, well, we need to find suspicious transactions such as they might have been documented in your tax and personal and corporate debt statements. But in addition, we want to know what leverage points there are against you. Where could somebody leverage you, blackmail you, bribe you, etc., into doing something that you wouldn't ordinarily be willing to do because you knew it was illegal or would get you into trouble or would jeopardize your business, but nonetheless might be leveraged into doing either because of the threat of being ruined financially or, hell, for that matter, the threat of being killed because you didn't do it. And the reason I bring that up, of course, is it highlights the reasoning behind our otherwise just justifiable demand, just based on transparency grounds, for Trump's tax returns. This is the reason that the public is deemed to have a right to see the tax returns of our elected officials and putative elected officials as candidates. We want to know who's got leverage over these guys. They're supposed to be serving us. We want to check the records that would most often and most reliably reveal any indications that they were instead serving some other interest other than the people who elected them. That's why it's a huge problem. That's why the Casino Commission got a hold of those things and why they demanded it, and why he was working so hard to avoid letting us have this. Okay. I guess this would be another place to remind myself that I wanted to bring that back to Newt Gingrich, now that I've even lost that train. But we'll continue on with this piece because this is important too. All right. So O'Brien obtains a copy of the reports for his book. Trump applied for the Atlantic City casino license. Regulators were able to review his tax returns and personal and corporate debt, giving them the most accurate picture of his finances. They found that he had an income of about $100,000 a year. $100,000 a year. Good money. And in 1979, even better money, but wow, that's a lot less than he said. An income of about $100,000 a year, while his 1979 tax returns showed a $3.4 million taxable loss. Trump's personal assets consisted of a $1 million trust fund that Fred Trump provided to each of his children and grandchildren, a few checking accounts with about $400,000 in them, and a 1977 Mercedes 450 SL. Basically, just about what you would have expected any more or less run-of-the-mill, spoiled rich kid to have in 1979 or so. You're the child of a multi-millionaire real estate developer. Here's what we're going to do for you. We'll send you to University of Pennsylvania. I'll give you a Mercedes. I'll put $1 million in the trust fund for you, one for each of the kids and one for each of the grandkids, and, a little running around money. $400,000 in the bank and a Mercedes. Okay. Nowhere did the report list an ownership stake in the Trump Organization's residential apartments. Trump also possessed a few parcels of valuable but highly leveraged real estate, financed with $22.5 million in debt, all of it secured by his father's assets. He did not own a safe deposit box or stocks in publicly traded companies. In sum, Trump was worth less than $5 million, not the $100 million that I had reported in the first Forbes 400. It's your fault. During our first interviews in 1982, Trump informed me that he had bought the Barbizon Plaza Hotel and the adjoining 110 Central Park West for just $13 million, a steal. While I was in Trump's office, a broker supposedly called to offer him $100 million for the property. Oh, isn't that convenient? I'll tell you, hi, this is John Barron. I'm a real estate broker. I'll pay you $100 million for that property that you just bought for $13 million. I hope nobody's there listening like any reporters from Forbes magazine, right? Trump refused the offer while looking me in the eye. He pointed out that his net worth should include an equity boost of $87 million in profit. I believed then that he used a staffer to stage the call, and I resisted the fictitious valuation. But the $13 million price tag for a valuable parcel was recorded in Forbes 400 files, and soon it showed up in other publications, such as New York Magazine. This is a good time to go back to Newt Gingrich at the end of this paragraph. It remains on Wikipedia today. Yet, tucked away on page 63 of the Casino Commission report was a section describing Trump's purchase of the property for $65 million, facilitated by a $50 million loan to Trump by Chase Manhattan Bank. As with many of these buildings, Trump's debt was far higher and his true equity far lower than he claimed. You see what happened here? He buys a building for $65 million with a $50 million loan. In other words, here he's out of pocket $15 million on this. But he spent $65 million was the price tag for this property. He tells the reporter it was worth $13 million. Stages a call where somebody says, I'll give you $100 million for it. And he says, there, boom, I just made $87 million in profit. Put me on your list. In fact, had the call been genuine, which it was not, it would have been an offer for $35 million in profit vis-a-vis the purchase price. But it being facilitated by a $50 million loan, it would in fact have been a net, I guess you could say, well, if it was purchased for $100 million and he owed $50 million on it, there's $50 million right off the top on that. That leaves $50 million still available for, I guess, for Trump to use after having paid off his debt. But, of course, his having put down, I guess, $15 million of his own on top of the $50 million loan, that's 50, 35. So 35, I mean, it would still be a $35 million take, I guess. And that's not bad at all, but it ain't $87 million. But just sort of an amazing MO there. $13 million is what he told the guy he paid. 65 is what that was actually paid. And the bulk of that wasn't his money anyway. Pretty typical New York real estate dealing for, the money not to really be yours in the first place. That's not unusual or, even problematic in any way. Of course, the valuation was something. But I said I was going to relate this to Newt Gingrich. Check out the play again, right? He says all this to the reporter. The reporter doesn't believe it, but nonetheless, the day, the deadline comes, you stick it in the files. It goes in the Forbes 400 files. You leave Forbes 400. Eventually, the successor comes in. He looks at the files that you've already compiled because he doesn't want to do all the work all over again. Says here 25,000 units. It says here that he paid $13 million for this parcel. So, it says here he booked $87 million profit. And so I'll put it down in Forbes 400 list number 4. And then New York Magazine, writing its own profile later on of Donald Trump, says, well, it wouldn't be in Forbes if Forbes hadn't verified it. We'll put it in the magazine too. And Wikipedia says, we're pretty open about the fact that you need to double, triple, quadruple check your sources, but everybody links to things here. This is in New York Magazine. This is in Forbes 400. I'll put in Wikipedia that he paid $13 million for this parcel of land, even though there's a public record somewhere else that says he paid $65 million. And then you and I, we want to prove things. We're talking on the radio. How much did he pay for that thing? I'll check Wikipedia. $13 million. There you have it. We know Wikipedia is kind of a questionable source from time to time. They're quite open about how they get their information, but we take their word for it fairly frequently nonetheless. So, Newt Gingrich, what does he have to do with this? One of the things I learned about Newt Gingrich's MO with press manipulation from this book has stuck with me for years. He used to run a very conscious game in which he would make one of his fantabulous claims somewhere in a speech, as I've said in the past on this show, before the age of both Google and handheld computer access from anywhere in the world. So your smartphone, you could fact check Donald Trump or Newt Gingrich as they were speaking. That was not something that was available to you then. You just make some kind of fantastic claim, And you make it to a room full of reporters, and 99% of the reporters in there are too smart to put the claim down in print, perhaps, or at least put it down without trying to do some debunking, perhaps. But when you find that one reporter who was willing to put it in there, or if you have a private conversation with that one reporter, this was another part of Newt's MO. You know, he knew that in a press conference with the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, whatever, name a couple more papers, throw them in there, Newsweek, Time Magazine, at those point they were important, right? Nobody might believe this thing, but of course, he was a congressman from Georgia. And of course, by the way, we might as well point out he was a congressman from Georgia because he did lots of research early on, said, I want to be a Republican congressman. And I'm from Pennsylvania. And although Pennsylvania does elect some Republicans, the chances were not nearly as good as they were in the early 1980s post-Reagan Revolution in places like really, not backwoods. It was suburban, ex-urban, conservative, Republican-leaning, white-only suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia in those days. And so he found a way to locate himself down there and run for office, just much as the Dick Cheney found himself a seat in Wyoming where he could run as a Republican, and if he was able to manage to get the nomination, you were a lock for it. He's not from Wyoming. He just put himself there because he knew he could win a seat there as a wild-eyed, wacko conservative Republican, and no one would question anything. Once he was there, though, the perch in ex-urban Atlanta, Georgia, Cobb County, Georgia, was advantageous for Gingrich because he could go to the local papers there, or even to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and plant stories there. He would make his wild-ass claims. He was at that point a congressman, and congressmen wouldn't just call up the newspaper and blatantly blow smoke up your ass, would they? So they print the story. If he could get one reporter to do it, whether it was in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution or some local paper in Cobb County somewhere, you do that. And what he would do is he would take the press clipping, and he or his press secretary or whatever, they would shop that press clipping around to the next level, right? If it's being printed in the, I don't know, give me a newspaper from Cobb County. I can't name one offhand. And you take it from, the Cobb County Courier, making it up, and you go to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. You say, I got to tell you, you guys are smart reporters. I deal with you guys all the time. I mean, you're tough but fair, I know. But you're getting scooped on this thing. Look at this. The little tiny Cobb County Courier has got the word on this story. And it's not usually a comment like Newt Gingrich is the most handsome and sexiest member of Congress ever. It's usually an outrageous right-wing claim about the nature of welfare or the nature of liberalism and the cultural elite and coastal elites, et cetera, et cetera. You're getting scooped on this story. And he would upsell it, to the next level up. And then when the Atlanta Journal-Constitution editors would say, we're missing out on this story. Look at the bold reporting going on at the Cobb County Courier. And they would run it. And now he has two clips. One from a small paper, one from a slightly larger, more recognizable paper. Getting a clip like that into the Atlanta Journal-Constitution means that you're able to go to the Washington Post at that point and say, I don't know, man, you're getting scooped by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution down there. And, not to mention the little paper, which is now unimportant. He's showing you the clip from, for volume, he's showing you whatever clips he can get. But look, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, that's no joke. They're scooping you guys here at the next level up, whatever it is. Let's say it's the Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, whatever. And they run it. If the Baltimore Sun runs it, look, Washington Post, you're getting scooped by the Baltimore Sun. Washington Post runs it. Look, Wall Street Journal, you're getting scooped by the Washington Post. And also the Baltimore Sun and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They print it. New York Times, where you been on the story? The Wall Street Journal's got it. Time Magazine now has got it. That was his game. Just play it one rung of the ladder at a time. And it's very much like what Trump did here. I'm sitting down with a reporter who's inclined to believe me because he's heard through the grapevine that I'm a rich guy. How many units do you have? 25,000. I'm going to bump it up from 22,000 to 25,000. If we can manage to make them swallow the 22,000, they'll believe us if we say we've increased it to 25,000. Once that's on the record, that's all there is to it. And from there, it gets up, 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 and up. What's the valuation of each one? $40,000. What? No way. All right, $20,000. Of course, this guy thinks it's $9,000. What's the price tag on that piece of property you bought? $13 million. It was a steal. All right, well, we'll put it in there, and it isn't until decades later we find out it's $65 million. But it's too late. You got it printed in Forbes. Forbes is a good enough source for New York Magazine to reprint the same. Oh, wrong music there. Reprint. I didn't want to alarm you. Got half an hour before we hear that one. They reprint it in New York Magazine based on the strength of it being in Forbes. Wikipedia. It's justifiable, right? Even if you're trying to make things up about Donald Trump, you can point to New York Magazine. You can point to to Forbes. And so that's enough, right? And it goes on and on from there. Just like Newt Gingrich did it, he built it a rung at a time. You'd think he was smart. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got one more segment to go here. Of course, there's a million things we didn't get to, but this is just so interesting. I feel like I want to pursue this. This is the payoff of everything we've been talking about for such a long time, and helps make things so clear, and I think helps make things so understandable in piecing together the whys and wherefores of the Russia connection as well. Let's continue on here. Just after revealing that Trump's debt was far higher and true equity far lower than he claimed with this particular piece of property, the 110 Central Park West deal, Roy Cohn had told me that Trump received $250 million. Remember? I guess he now pins it down to what deal that was from. $250 million from Holiday Inn for its half interest in the Atlantic City Casino. But according to O'Brien, remember the biographer who got the records from the Atlantic City Casino Commission, Trump's actual income from the deal was a construction and management fee, not profit, of about $24 million, while Holiday Inn financed the construction of the $220 million casino. So he got a $24 million construction and management fee, which is distinct from the profit on that fee. Later attempts by Trump to paint himself as fantastically wealthy were also duplicitous. By the way, I guess once again I want to just stop here and say I'm struck as I'm reading through this stuff, remembering that in 1980s or so, they decided that his assets were $400,000 in the bank, a $1 million trust fund, and a 1977 Mercedes 450 SL. But remembering that Trump very frequently made a show of having himself driven around in a limousine, not that he couldn't have afforded a limousine, even with the limited assets that he had. But more to the point, I guess I was thinking of the story we once read that was kind of a bizarre and left-fieldish sort of story about his partnering with a limousine manufacturer and trying to get them to produce a Donald Trump branded limousine. I really know luxury, and I know one thing I know better than anything is luxury limousines, and everybody's going to want a Trump limousine because everyone knows I'm totally into the most luxurious luxury. Mine have little phones in them, and of course they're essential for doing business because I've seen on television in Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous where rich guys have telephones in their cars. So my car will have telephone. And driving around in these ridiculous limos and everything. And then now it makes so much more sense. Before we just sort of thought of it, we made the connection probably in our minds, but before we just sort of saw it discussed anyway in these articles as Trump scamming a free limo off somebody, because why not? And it was kind of a funny story, like, he's rich, how come he's scamming free limos off of people? Well, he's not rich. And he couldn't have afforded to develop a limo like that. But instead, he used the fact that he was on the Forbes 400 list to get a guy living, maybe not hand to mouth, but, eking out a living making custom limos. Make me one like this and make a prototype and I'll shop it around and I'm rich and famous and everyone will see it and I will say it's for sale and we'll launch a line of Donald Trump limos. Just give me the one prototype for free, so I can drive it around and everyone will see it and then they'll all want one. And that sounds like it makes sense to this guy. Besides, he'll pay me. He's on the Forbes 400 list. You go through the expense of making this stupid custom limo. He drives it around all over the place. This is a guy who, at the end of the day, has $1 million trust fund, $400,000 in the bank, owes $35 million, and he's got a Mercedes 450 SL. It's just, a suburban rich kid living on a trust fund, and that's that. But he tells you he's on the Forbes 400 list. They believed it. You see the list. You can get a Forbes magazine. You make a limo for him. He has no intention of selling limo. I mean, if people start offering him millions of dollars for it, he'll take the millions of dollars. He might not forward the orders to you. But, in the meantime, you thought you were going to get paid eventually and that you'd be launching a real business here. Risky as it is. All he wanted, though, was a free limousine, and that's what he got out of you. All right, back to the story. Later attempts by Trump to paint himself as fantastically wealthy were also duplicitous. In 1989, Trump sent Forbes journalist Harry Seneca a statement of his $3.7 billion worth. I have obtained the letter. It indicated $900 million in liquid assets. I am more liquid than any major developer in the United States, Trump wrote, inducing the magazine to increase Trump's listing from $1 billion in 1988 to $1.7 billion in 1989. But according to the New Jersey Casino Commission, which issued another report in 1991, by the end of 1990, Trump's entire cash position in both his business and personal accounts was just $19 million, not $1.7 billion, 1,000 times higher or whatever. Is it 1.9 million? Let's say 10 times would be 190 million. Okay, so 100 times bigger than what he was saying. I have $1.7 billion. No, 19 million. The amount was insufficient to pay the debt on his over-leveraged casino and real estate holdings, while still covering his personal expenses of $1 million per month. His net worth, the commission estimated, was $205 million, less than 6% of what he'd told Forbes. In 1990, the magazine dropped Trump from the list, and it kept him off for 5 years. Forbes declined to comment for this article, but its top editor, Randall Lane, interviewed then-candidate Trump for the Forbes 400 in 2015 and wrote about the magazine's long struggle to accurately assess his net worth in an article titled, Inside the Epic Fantasy That's Driven Donald Trump for 33 Years. How did we miss this article? I'm going to open that one up and put that away for later. Of the 1,538 tycoons who had been on the rich list through the years, Lane wrote, quote, not one has been more fixated with his or her net worth estimate on a year-in, year-out basis than Donald J. Trump. I was a leading New York real estate reporter through the 1980s. I left the Forbes staff in 1983, but continued to freelance for the magazine while writing major investigative features as a contributing editor for the new Manhattan Inc. magazine, as well as New York Avenue and New York City Business. I knew all the key players. I thought I had a handle on this material. But Trump was so competent in conning me that until 35 years later, I did not know I had been conned. Instead, I had gone through my career in national media with a misinformed sense of satisfaction. Satisfaction. That, as a perceptive young journalist, I called Trump on his lies and gave Forbes readers, who used the rich list as a barometer of private wealth, a more accurate picture of his finances than the one he was selling. The joke was on me and everyone else. How do you like that? Trump's fabrications provided the basis for a vastly inflated wealth statement for the Forbes 400 that would give him cachet for decades as a triumphant businessman, and of course lead to a career playing one on TV thanks to the editors of The Apprentice. In truth, almost nobody had a clear picture of Trump's books. In 1990, Trump brought in Steve Bollenbach as a new chief financial officer to respond to lender concerns, they were finally catching on, about his crippling debt. When Bollenbach began delving into the organization's finances, he got a surprise. Oh, we just got a surprise from Armando here. Let's add him to the picture. Hey, Armando. Somebody finally wrote the article we've been waiting for. How you doing?
Yeah, but I just can't believe Forbes lets itself off the hook. So
well, yeah. I mean, Forbes does. This guy, at least, we're finally getting into the end of the article here, is like, yeah, I thought I really did a good job and I sucked. Well, okay.
But how could you not have known you were doing a crappy job?
I don't know. I can't. I mean, I was stuck way earlier in this article. Like, Donald Trump called you in 1982 and, lied and lied and lied, and you recorded it. And then in 1984, he called again and lied and lied and lied, but said it was John Barron. And you're like, John Barron. Huh, okay. Now, admittedly, in 1984, I don't know if anybody would have talked to Donald Trump at that point enough to be able to recognize, oh, yeah, that's Donald Trump. But
no, in New York, you would have known his voice.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I really think so by that point. But I'm marveling at all this stuff, and I'm thinking about all the other deals that he did, and then it occurs to me, for instance, did you hear the story about the deal on the 110 Central Park West, where he said, I bought this property for $13 million? I don't know if you heard that part. This was a great thing. Tell me. I'll just repeat the story quickly. So this reporter is back there interviewing him again for like his second or third year on the Forbes 400 list, and just by sheer coincidence, as this reporter is sitting in his office and Donald Trump says, you know what the best deal I made this year, I bought 110 Central Park West. You know what I got it for? I stole that property. I paid $13 million for that. I am going to make out like a bandit on that. Ring, 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 ring. Oh, hold on a minute. It's a phone call. I got to take this call. Hello? What? You're interested in buying 110 Central Park West? Really? What kind of price do you have in mind? $100 million? Hold on just a second. Did you hear that? I'm going to make $87 million in this deal. Yes, I'm interested. Sure. We'll talk for lunch. Right. Okay. Thank you. I'll get back to you. Click. Do you hear that? You should put me on the list. I just made $87 million in profit. Now, meanwhile, he then says, so a couple years later, he obtains his records from, where do they get the accurate information? You and I have pointed it out in the past. The New Jersey Atlantic City Casino Commission. The only ones who ever really were able to leverage his actual financial picture out of him because, of course, the government needed to know that you weren't being leveraged by organized crime. Like, that's why we want your tax returns now, but you won't give it to us because you're the government. So anyway, they found out, oh yeah, the price tag wasn't $13 million. It was $65 million. And of course, now the guy does say, I suspected, and I believed even then that the call had been staged by a staffer to offer the $100 million. Yeah, right. So he knew that, and he wouldn't accept the claim that was being made at the time by Trump. But so $65 million was the price tag, not $13 million. $50 million of it was borrowed from Chase Manhattan Bank, and nobody was offering to buy it for $110 million. But nonetheless, it somehow ends up getting eventually into the Forbes 400 files that the price was $13 million. And once Forbes prints it, New York Magazine, and profiling Trump later on, prints, yeah, he bought that for $13 million. And he points out, it's still in Wikipedia today. The notes say, yeah, $13 million was the price for 110 Central Park West. And this goes on and on and on. I can't believe that it's gone on for so long. And then I guess, I don't know what this article ever winds up getting here, but now you're beginning to see, and others are pointing out, even using this article as a basis, this is why the Russia story starts, and this is why the Russia story is important. There's no business here. He's not making any money. He's not wealthy, and he never has been. And the only people who were willing to deal with him were either American businesses and banks that were fooled by dumb stuff like depending on Forbes 400 for determining whether or not the guy was wealthy, or people who didn't care because they were only laundering money anyway. And guess who that describes? Shortly after all of this, of course, he buys some derelict mansion by the ocean in Florida and sells that for $100 million to Russia, to a Russian, and everything else. And it builds these buildings, and it's filled with money launderers and mobsters from all over the world because they don't care about whether or not they're getting ripped off. They're laundering money. They know that they're getting a real estate asset out of it, and that's fine. And everything about Donald Trump has been fake, fake, fake since the beginning. And this article also revealing he didn't own any equity at all in anything Fred Trump ever built until Fred Trump died in 1999. Up until that point, in the 1980s, the Casino Commission found his assets to be a $1 million trust fund, $1 million, $400,000 in cash, and a 1977 Mercedes 450 SL. That's it.
Because that's all he had.
Yeah. So then he was playing at the game of, he has Roy Cohn calling Forbes, threatening them, you better print he's worth $500,000 or I'll sue you, $500 million, or I'll sue you. Trump is saying he's worth $1 billion. He's worth $5 million at this point, at best. And, and then from there, when he loses it all, he then at some point convinces Mark Burnett to say, I want you to produce a television series purporting that I'm the greatest businessman in history. All right, I'll do that. There you go. Now America says we need to elect a businessman as president. I'm the greatest one there is. Boom, he's president. And he didn't have anything. He was on no better footing when he was living it up, pretending he was a Studio 54 playboy. No better footing than any other suburban rich kid in the northeastern states. You got it. Your dad sent you to Penn. He gave you $1 million trust fund and a Mercedes. That's nice. It's fantastic.
He took over the family business eventually, is all he did.
Yeah, but he hadn't done that. He didn't do that until 1999. Yeah, and he destroyed his brothers and sisters along the way.
Exactly.
So
it's insanity. But I'll hang up now. But my whole thing is, Forbes. You did this. If the guy came threatening you and doing this and that, I said, listen, you're not on the list, period. We can't put you because we can't verify what you're actually worth. Sorry. You can't get sued for that.
But I'll sue you. And I don't know, Roy Cohn, he probably would sue you. And that's
for
why.
For not including me in this stupid list?
Yeah, well, I mean, he would sue you. There's no doubt that it would be a dumb suit and he would eventually drop it. But for the time being, would he file a lawsuit? Sure, he would. And that's why it was so interesting to watch Michael Cohen go down the other day, because he did this. He for years lived the same way, or finding out that he had dropped the BuzzFeed suit. That all he did was
had more access to money than Trump, relatively speaking.
Yes,
I mean, he had the Ukrainian and the Russian mob money.
Yeah, and the taxi medallions. But that's all his MO ever was, and Trump's. He would just threaten to sue, and you, as mom and pop business guy, or you painted whatever. Well,
Forbes,
them. I was saying just the rest of the world. I guess Forbes didn't have that worry. I mean, you're not going to sue me out of business. But I don't know. I'm not certain why they. I guess in the end, you take that to the editor, and the editor's like, you know what, put him on a list. Big deal. Who cares? It's a stupid fake list anyway.
I'll get you that. I mean, that shows you how ridiculous the entire list was because they didn't know what anybody was actually worth.
Right. And that's one of the first things he says is the private real estate sector was impossible to figure this stuff out, which is why it's a great place to launder money.
Yeah, they're not particularly good at figuring anybody else out either. I don't think they.
I guess
know.
not. But at least with a publicly traded company, if you say if you're the CEO of a publicly traded company, I know how many shares you have, and approximately what they're worth today. So boom,
you can figure out Buffett, for example, because he owns basically everything in publicly traded companies. It's disclosed to Berkshire Hathaway, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
So it's pretty incredible, and it's not necessarily the biggest news of the day, although it's very much talked about. But I had to read through this thing, and I didn't even get to the Comey memos because what's the point? Everybody has already read those except me.
But, well, they just say the same old thing, and it's a lot of P-tape stuff. But
yeah, I'm excited about that.
It's just crazy. What's interesting about it is that the Republicans insisted on making a story out of it.
Yeah, and no word yet on what they thought they were getting out of it.
I think it was Trump's idea, though, based on his reaction.
There you go. Yes, he was insisting. It shows no collusion. It doesn't. But yeah, I thought that was kind of a funny thing.
Collusion.
Because they're pre-firing. Right. The memo that Comey wrote when he was still FBI director doesn't have any evidence of my firing him for colluding with Russia. I know. He's still the FBI director when he writes it. It's the fact that you fire him later that creates a large part of the problem.
I would point out a story that I think should get more traction than hopefully will, which is from Rachel Maddow's interview with James Comey last night. He confirmed that there was open, while he was still FBI director, an investigation as to collusion between the New York FBI office.
Yes, I knew you would like that part.
And Rudy Giuliani.
Yes, his new lawyer.
Yeah, and I recommend Greg Sargent's take on it this morning. He's right. And one of the great benefits to it, one of the many benefits will be a democratically controlled House Intelligence Committee that will look into that.
Yeah, well, that would be nice.
But, of course, Rudy Giuliani being the attorney for Trump now is incredibly bizarre as well. He's a potential witness. He was a part of the Trump campaign, a critical part of it.
Mm-hmm.
How could he be the attorney on this?
I don't know. It's also sort of an interesting question. I didn't really ask it at the time, but I noticed in reading about Giuliani that he's going to take this job on and taking leave from Greenberg-Traurig to do it. And that why I didn't ask at the time, but now I want to ask. So why would you have to do that? Why wouldn't Greenberg-Traurig say, yeah, defending the president? You bet. President of the United States, great client. Fantastic.
Well, I guess he's doing it for free.
Or eventually he will be doing it for free. He may not know it, but I think Greenberg-Traurig does.
Paid, sitting in a corner.
Yeah, Greenberg-Traurig, I think, said it's not that we can't have you representing a controversial politician. Not that we can't have you representing the President of the United States. That's a great client, normally. It's that we can't have you doing it as billable hours for Greenberg-Traurig because we're not going to get paid. If you want to do it on your own and not get paid, go for it.
Go for it. Do you think DeGeneva and Tensing are mad that Rudy got the gig and they didn't?
No, because they know they wouldn't get paid, and they're out on their own. They can't afford to not get paid. Giuliani, I guess, has been taking in, partner money from Greenberg-Traurig
and all sorts of weird things.
Oh, I guess not enough.
And
they're all scammers.
From Turkish kidnappers.
Whatever happened to just, I'm a partner in a major firm. That's it, and I'm rich because of that.
Yeah, and they make a lot of money. I don't know. You tell me. I mean, these guys, who knows what they're about. But he needs more money now because he's getting divorced again. So,
yes, that's true. That's another recurring problem for him.
Well, you got to, unless he has a prenup, which he probably does,
because he's a great lawyer
and he's very religious,
and yet he's got no money. You tell me what's happening.
He's a very, very observant Catholic.
Right. I'm a fantastic lawyer. I have a rock solid prenup. By the way, have I told you about LifeLock, my favorite?
Yeah, I think. Did I make that up? I thought he did do.
I don't know. Maybe I took your word for it, like this Forbes 400 sucker. But you're probably right.
Exactly. Here we go. Run it with Forbes. I'm John
Put it in
Barrett.
Wikipedia.
I represent LifeLock.
Well, anyway, I found this to be fascinating. I knew you would be interested in it too. I don't even think we're going to have time to get to what Greg Sargent wrote today, but I have a list of 2 or 3 pieces that are, the most amazing thing about what was in the Comey memos.
I don't know what else people thought about. I mean, I read most of them, and the thing Rent's asking if there was a FISA warrant on Flynn.
Yeah, that was
wild.
Good. I liked where he said, Putin told me they had the most beautiful prostitutes. But I'm not even talking about that. I hate prostitutes.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Let me just give you, I got the ridiculousness of James Comey.
Okay.
He tells that story about Rent's asking and how he's explaining to him this isn't the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Comey answers the question anyway.
Yes.
It's like, what the hell, Comey?
I don't know.
He said, okay, great. Thank you for the lecture. You gave me the information. And I'll be calling you next week with another inappropriate question that you can give me a lecture to that you will answer.
Yes.
I mean, what a fool. I can't.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's another good opportunity to remind everybody that I'm glad all of this is coming out. I'm glad that Comey kept contemporaneous notes because it will be helpful in taking Trump down. But James Comey made a series of gigantic mistakes for which he should, in fact, have been fired. It's just an irony of history that he's being fired by a person who deserved much more and for much greater and more important reasons to be banished from public life.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. As a redemption tour, I mean, Comey's just...
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get it. Anyway, I'm going to let you go. Have a great weekend. Thanks for letting me vent about the Forbes article.
Yes, well, I did it for 2 hours, so you deserved a couple minutes too. Thanks, okay. Armando. We'll see you later. And yeah, have a good weekend if you still can. All right, let's see. What else have we got for the last couple minutes here before winding up? We'll cram in a few more paragraphs here. Where do we leave off? Oh, yes, there was Bolenbach, right? In truth, nobody had a clear picture of Trump's books. He brought in Steve Bolenbach as CFO, trying to figure out what was going on in the Trump organization. Bolenbach dives into the organization's finances, gets a surprise. The Washington Post's Michael Kranish and Mark Fisher write in Trump Revealed, their comprehensive 2016 biography. The small staff of the 26th floor of Trump Tower included 3 accountants. Each knew about pieces of the fraying empire, the casinos, for instance, or the condos, but no one knew the overall picture. There were no consolidated financial reports. Run the country like a business. Oy vey. In the absence of a functioning balance sheet, the list didn't just make Trump feel like a winner, according to O'Brien. It may have provided some of the documentation he needed to borrow reckless sums of money. Vast loans that he used for years to actually make him a winner. The more often Forbes mentions him, the more credible Donald's claim to vast wealth became, O'Brien said, arguing that Trump and the list were mutually reinforcing. The more credible his claim to vast wealth became, the easier it was for him to get on the Forbes 400, which, in turn, became the standard that other media, and apparently some of the country's biggest banks, used when judging Donald's riches. Trump returned to the rich list in 1996 with a reported net worth of $450 million and an editor's note that he claimed to be worth $2 billion. He never fell off it again. In his book, O'Brien criticized Forbes for rewarding Trump's fabrications, citing interviews with 3 people with direct knowledge of Donald's finances, who estimated his true net worth after debts to be somewhere between $150 and $250 million. Still lots of money. Trump, who had told O'Brien he was worth $6 billion, sued for libel and lost. When he lost his appeal in 2011, and that's not long ago, a New Jersey appellate judge wrote the largest portion of Mr. Trump's fortune, according to 3 people who had direct knowledge of his holdings, I've lost my place here, apparently comes from his lucrative inheritance. That's the largest portion of his fortune. These people estimated that Mr. Trump's wealth, presuming that it is not encumbered by heavy debt, which it actually was, of course. Not encumbered by heavy debt, may amount to about $200 million to $300 million. Maybe, if he's lucky. That is an enviably large sum of money by most people's standards, but falls far short of the Billionaires Club. The opacity persists. In 2016, Trump's presidential campaign put out a statement saying the candidate had a net worth in excess of $10 billion. But he has never released his tax returns, and he has said that the core Trump Organization asset is the ownership of his brand, an ineffable marketing claim that is impossible to substantiate or to refute, and just as opaque as real estate holdings in that sense, and a great place to launder money, and the way he has made a living for the past 20 plus years, I would assume. I'm sorry we didn't get an opportunity to get to more interesting and more outrageous and more amazing stories, and there are plenty of them out there, and you will no doubt hear plenty of them on Justice's program coming up next. Lots of listicles of the most amazing takeaways from the James Comey memos, but probably nothing you didn't know before. I thought this was perhaps a much more enlightening synthesis of so many aspects of what we've seen in Donald Trump and so many Republicans like Newt Gingrich in the past, and a better way perhaps to spend our time before we're sending ourselves off into the weekend, possibly the last for the existence of mankind on the planet, given the North Korea situation. But hey, we'll cross our fingers that Donald Trump is looking forward to golfing in New Jersey and his Virginia properties for the rest of the year, and rely on that for our survival.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com, you have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
For a different take on things, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes up next. Look what Justice Putnam's got for you on the menu today. A shockingly racist IQ map emerges on the campus of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo after students protest against a frat's blackface photos. My goodness, still happening to this day.